as you all know, these Motivation Monday conversations are all about normalizing the human experience along the journey to medicine. This is all born out of the movement that Gabba currently has to make everyone aware that you don't have to be perfect and you don't have to be this cookie cutter person in order for you to be successful in the career to medicine.
Okay, I'm so excited. I feel like it's been like ages since I last talked to you, but I'm happy that you're here. To everyone that's listening, thank you so much for joining us for our first ever Motivation Monday. You're about to be super great Dr. Hussain, who's been out here changing the world, one conversation at a time. And so today I'm very excited to have her on to talk about diversity and the importance of pipeline programs and where we can just go from here, how we can be better, how we can be, great. So Dr. Hussain, I can't even do your introduction justice. Tell everybody that's listening how you've been taking over the world.
Well, I don't know if I'm there just yet. Working on that. My name is Qaali Hussein. I am a trauma surgeon. I practice in the state of Florida. I trained in Texas. Actually, no, I'm in the state of Arizona. I was in Florida and I trained in Texas. We have a lot going on. I'm originally from Somalia. And came to the States as a 9-year-old. I started in 4th grade here, did all my schooling in Texas, and now I do trauma and acute care surgery. And I'm also a mother of 6 little ones.
Yes, so you stay busy.
Yes, very, very busy.
Yeah, next time I complain about being tired, I will think of you and be like, nope, you don't know tired. You have no idea. So yes. Naturally, both of us, melanin exhibit A, are of diverse background.
Yes.
Why don't you share, what was your journey to medicine? What made you go to trauma surgery? And how was that journey maybe different for you than some of your peers?
So I've always been interested in medicine, and surgery came into the picture because as I grew up, I realized I really liked working with my hands. I liked fixing things. I liked building things, with my dad and with my brothers. And so the technical aspect of it, of surgery, really attracted me. But, when we were in Somalia, we had a civil war break. Unfortunately, my grandmother was shot in the war, and I was one of the people who observed that. I was in the same truck as her, and her legs were shot, and I was one of the people who was holding pressure. And so that was my first exposure to actual trauma that happened within my family. Thank God she survived and she was able to, rehabilitate and start walking again when we were in Kenya, and then we came to the US. And so I really saw her go through that and how long it took her to recover. Yeah. And so as I started, pursuing medicine, she was one of the people that really, had a really life-changing conversation with me to tell me, to not listen to the naysayers and to really pursue what I wanted. When I got into medical school and I started doing surgery, trauma was one of those things that automatically clicked for me. And it really, at the time it didn't, it wasn't those two things. Oh, I saw my family go through this. Now I can, save lives. It was just like an instinct, like a feeling that I really couldn't explain, but I was automatically drawn. And so that's one of the reasons why I went into surgery.
Oh, wow. That is an amazing story. I naturally didn't have this. I love trauma surgery, but let me tell you, I don't know how y'all stay up for as many hours as y'all do.
It's the adrenaline.
Is it? Is it?
It's the adrenaline. You could be sleepy and a trauma comes in and it's like, nothing else matters.
Maybe it's different from the medical student perspective because I'm just standing there retracting the whole time, nodding off, just retracting, nodding off. But
no, but it's like, but when a trauma comes in, when you're the trauma surgeon, when a trauma comes in, it's, you're trying to figure out a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
What is killing my patient? Where are they bleeding from? How can I stop it? So that's how I tend to and you're trying to solve it. And so until your patient becomes stable, you're trying to figure out, okay, where is it? Is it in the head? Is it in the chest? Is it in the belly? You know, how can we save this leg? So I think that part of it is what's really intriguing, and that's how you can easily forget the fatigue of being up for 24.
Yeah, 24 hours is a long time. But yeah, I can definitely see that. And so you've like taken your commitment to healing and to, you know, fixing the problem into the conversation, the context of talking about diversity and diversity education. And I just love that. I love, of course, that's what we talk a lot about at Gabba. And so I would just love it if you share, like, you know, what inspired you to do that work and really take that conversation to the next level.
So as I was going through, you know, my pursuit of medicine and pursuit of a surgical education and training, the most consistent message that I have received throughout my years has been that I don't belong, right? My, you know, educational achievements, the fact that I was, you know, always at the top of my class didn't matter. You know, my hard work didn't matter. My determination didn't matter. You know, no matter how committed I was to my work and to this field, I was always told that I wasn't welcome, right? So, you know, I kept pushing myself over and over and over to keep proving people wrong. And every single time I tried to do that, you know, the goalpost has been moved for me. You know, you, as a Muslim woman, you're not welcome in medicine. I got into medicine. As a hijabi woman, you're not going to be welcome into surgery, which is a, you know, white male dominated field. I got into surgery as a hijabi woman. I was told to take off the hijab. I put my foot down and stood up and said, nope, this is who I am. I have a civil right that you can't, you know, violate. And so, and then they started, your priorities have changed and you are no longer committed to being a surgeon, right? So, you know, and I kept having kids, and it was, oh, you know, you're not prioritizing medicine, you're not prioritizing surgery, therefore, you know, you're taking up somebody else's spot, you don't belong here. And so no matter how much I pushed, I never felt welcomed as who I am, and I've never felt like I was being helped. There are a few, you know, people who were supportive along the way, who would, you know, support me behind closed doors and encourage me. But publicly, I mean, there were things happening where I was a chief resident, and by that time I've had an intern baby, a second-year baby. My chief year, I was pregnant with my twins, or no, I had my fourth-year baby, and my chief year, I was pregnant with my twins. You know, one of my fellow colleagues, male, whose wife had a kid, you know, is being praised at ground rounds at, you know, how wonderfully he's taking on both, you know, fatherhood and surgery, and how we need to go easy on him because he's not sleeping at night. And I'm standing there 2 weeks postpartum and nobody's saying anything, right? And every time I'm pregnant, it's like, oh, you know, you're such an inconvenience. So that consistent messaging really took a toll on me. And when I finished, I got to the point where I finished and I passed my boards, and my, you know, program director was shocked at the fact that I actually passed my boards, and, you know, took it upon himself to make me feel bad about the fact that I had, you know, 6 kids and I would never be able to afford sending them to, you know, private school, right? So everything that you accomplish is belittled and is, you know, negated by the next thing that you can't accomplish. That when I finished, you know, it took me about 3 years to really deal with the trauma of going through all that negativity. And I started writing, and I started, you know, to go through this stuff. Nobody deserves to have this much negativity in, you know, their pursuit of a, you know, of a career in which they want to actually take care of people. And so as I started sharing my story and sharing my experiences, you know, it just, people connected and you know, felt, you know, that they were going through the same thing, but everybody suffers in silence. I've suffered in silence because I didn't want to share with anybody, because the message is what, you know, we told you so. We
Yeah.
told you it's impossible, right? Everything I've accomplished today, I've been told it was, it was impossible. And I've actually had in my first job interview for an academic position, I had a chairman throw my CV across the table and tell me I've accomplished nothing after having kids in surgery in a surgical training program, multiple kids. And so, I was told it was impossible to accomplish all those things. And by the time I've accomplished them, they were called nothing, right?
What? Yeah. What? And like, you just keep going and going. It doesn't matter how great you are. They're just going to keep asking for more and more and more and more and more. It's to break you down.
Exactly. So because of that, over the past few years, I've really been documenting all of my experiences and the lessons that I've learned. And, I realized that we need to approach this differently, right?
Yeah.
We tell people to work hard and prove people wrong and, be the best that they can, be at the top of their class. But what I've realized throughout the years is that none of that matters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You could be the best in your class. You could be the most determined. You could be the most dedicated, and you're still going to face the same negativity. You're still going to face the same, pipeline issues. And what the pipeline problem is, for diversity and inclusion, what all of these different fields, what they've decided to do is they decided to recruit more diversity, right? They decided to recruit more Black people, more people of color, more, religious, underrepresented religious minorities in these different situations. So they've recruited people into these fields, but the fields remain exclusive. The fields remain racist. The fields remain exclusionary to people who don't belong, who don't look like the majority. So what happens is people come in, they get harassed nonstop. They get discriminated against nonstop. They don't get supported when they need support. So what do they end up doing? They start leaving, right? So you have this pipeline, you're trying to get people through, but there's so many holes in the system that people just keep leaving and leaving and leaving. And what you end up with is the same problem that you started with, right? You don't have diversity.
You don't have enough diversity. Exactly.
You don't have enough diversity because, yes, you committed to bringing people in, but you still have a system that remains hostile and that remains toxic. Right? So what I've learned is how to navigate through the system, how to go into it with your own values, and how you're going to stick to your own values and shut out the negativity that is pervasive in the system. Right? So that's one of the things that I teach in my Taking Up Space Masterclass that I recently created is we need to approach this differently. Coming in, into a place that is hostile to you and who you are and what you want to accomplish, unless you're prepared to deal with that, it's it's like you're being sent in to the wolves, right? That's exactly how I felt. But we need to strategize and we need to approach this pipeline problem differently.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely agree. I mean, even as I'm thinking back as you're talking about, my own experience as a minority student. I'm a fourth year now, and I'm from Flint, Michigan. So the idea of me coming somewhere and getting to medical school was such a hurdle. I mean, there's a cost obstacle. There's you have all these different exams you have to prep for. Like, how do you even begin to know what you don't know? And then you get into this system, and it's exactly like you said, there's not enough support built into the experience for minority candidates who are coming in, and they need that support if they're going to make it and navigate. But I think what's amazing about what you say is that support doesn't come from just having more counseling services or more study materials. That support comes from building the person on the inside and giving them that armor so that they can go into those experiences and not only protect themselves, but potentially, change the structure of the institution from the inside. I think that's amazing. And it's clear you've been able to do that. And I'm just like, how? How did you do it? Because I remember going and deciding I was going to go get my MBA and hearing and having an administrator say, like, no, I don't see you as a business person. And me having to really step back and say, you know, no, Candace, who are you besides what this person is trying to tell you, and go and pursue your goals. And so, you know, for the students that may be listening, like, what would you say helped you get to a place where those things didn't sting and didn't deter you from your goals?
So that's what I like to call value-based goal setting, right? Everybody who goes into medicine sets, you know, generic goals of, you know, I need to get this MCAT score, I need to get, you know, this much research, I need to get this, and that, right?
Yeah.
One of the obstacles that, you know, minority students will face is that who they are is an obstacle in itself, right? It's really sad to say, but who they are, who you are as an individual, you know, the color of your skin, what you wear on your head as part of a religious, you know, practice, how, you know, you carry yourself, how you speak, all those things are a part of who you are as a person. Reality, like the reality is, we live in a society, and we practice in a field where those things are defined as abnormal, are defined as unprofessional, right? Are seen as less than, right? So one of, like, a pivotal point in my journey was the conversation that I had with my grandmother when I was 15 years old. And I was struggling with, you know, taking on the hijab and, you know, practicing it. And, you know, the fact that I wanted to be a surgeon, and how I was told that the two are completely incompatible. And she told me this, you know, story of how she basically changed our entire family trajectory. She got married at the age of 13 to my 40-year-old grandfather. And she had multiple kids, right? And she didn't go to school. Yeah. Right? She didn't go to school. She didn't get an education, but she was a brilliant woman, right? So what she decided for her children is, they're going to go to school. They're going to get their education. You know, marriage is going to be secondary. You know, when they're self-sufficient, when my daughters are self-sufficient and they can make decisions for themselves and they can support themselves, they have the freedom to get married. But she never, you know, took up picket signs. She didn't argue with anybody. She ruled her house, like her household, with an iron fist. She made that, you know, decision between her and her children. And when people would come and seek her daughter's hands in marriage, she was very respectful of the culture and of her people. And she would be like, oh, okay, thank you for coming. And in private, she'll say, no, absolutely
no,
not.
don't do that. That's not for us.
And so because of that, and then when they got to college, you know, age, she told them, you know, that they worked really hard, got scholarships, and she sent them abroad with the women by themselves, right? In a time when women were getting married right after high school, back themselves as Muslim women, you know, who's looking out for them, what are they getting into? So she took all that in and didn't respond, because she knew what her goals were for her daughters, for her family, right? And so when the war happened, we were all like, we had people abroad to sponsor us, and so we were lucky, right? And not once did she argue with anybody, did she, you know, fuss at anybody or say this is unfair. She just did what she wanted to do because she knew what her values were. And so she told me that story when I was 15 years old, and she said, honey, who are you arguing with whether you're going to wear a hijab or not? I was like, no.
Good point. Good point.
She's like, are you asking anybody permission? And I was like, no. And she's like, and you're in America, right? You have rights. You have, you know, nobody's going to come and take the hijab off of you, right? And I was like, yeah.
Good point. I like the way she thinks.
No, and she's like, don't ask anybody permission. She's like, you know, well, the only thing that's important for you to accomplish is study, make the good grades, and see, you know, if you're in a place that'll accept you for who you are. And if they don't accept you, then they don't deserve you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like,
exactly.
Okay. I was like, okay, I can do this. And so that conversation from the time I was 15 years old carries me to this day. Every time I feel like, oh my God, you know, there's going to be backlash. They may not like this, or they may think this of me. We put too much value in what other people think, right? Way too much value. And so I think if you look at what is important to you, what do you value, And how are you going to, pursue your goal while keeping your values? And anybody who, goes against your values is someone that's not for you. I think that will
Right.
help people, people make better decisions. If someone
Yeah.
is pushing back against you because of your values, then, that for who you are, if they don't, value your skills and your whole identity, then that's not somebody that you want to do business with,
Yeah.
or that you want to get into a relationship with.
Exactly. I think I'm thinking of, some elders in my family saying, the people that mind don't matter and the people that matter don't mind. So,
Yep, exactly.
Don't let people tell you who you are and what your value is. And I agree with you. As a minority, you have to remember that you should not go into these systems looking for validation, because they're not going to validate the thing that makes you most, special, and the thing that really makes you a standout doctor and a standout medical candidate, which is,
Yep.
all of this.
Everything.
So yeah, all of this. And so if they can't see it, that's okay. People didn't recognize Picasso. That's all right. They'll catch up. It's fine. We'll catch them up later.
Eventually they'll catch up. Yep.
Eventually. And I'm listening, and I think that that's so important, kind of reaching back and thinking about, the people in your background who have supported you, who have inspired you and encouraged you, even as you're going through situations where people may not be. And so that kind of like makes me wonder, like, who are your mentors? Who inspires you every day?
Well, as I told you, my grandmother. So first and foremost, she was the person to set me on the right track to say, you know what, you're caring too much about, other people.
Yeah.
Really sit down and figure out what is important to you and what you value. And so because of that, I really came to prioritize differently. And so, number one is family. They're the ones that, throughout my, my training, medical school residency, that I really leaned on a lot. To every time I was, and I think that's one of the things that, unfortunately, a lot of minorities that I encounter, especially, if you're from a Muslim background, if you're, from communities where family is really, really important, sometimes we have that divide of, them telling you to stay, staying true to your values and your beliefs, is, it may not be possible for you to, have high ambitions, right? And so a lot of people stray away from the family unit and the community because they have high ambitions. And I think that's one of the sad things that that I've seen in a lot of young people pursuing, their big audacious goals. And that's one of the things that I always try and teach, to say, you know what, when this ambition that you're reaching for knocks you down, right?
Yeah.
Because it's gonna get rough. Guess who's gonna be there for you, right? Guess who's gonna be there to support you and to really, regardless of what, issues that you guys have been through, the people who are gonna really support you and who are gonna be there for you unconditionally is gonna be your family. So. So those are the people that I really, hold dearly, is the family and the community that really has supported me. And I have some wonderful mentors, within the surgical world, that throughout the years have, told me that I was stubborn, but that they supported me.
Support you anyway, love you anyway. That's fine.
Yes. We don't know why you keep having these kids, but you know what? As long as you're operating, we're good.
Not why you keep having the kids. Because family.
Yeah.
Family.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and they've been some of the people that, question. Okay, I guess we'll keep it, we'll keep going and see how things go. And, at the end they said, you proved us wrong.
But Yeah, I mean, and you have done it above and beyond. I mean, because you're not just a surgeon. You have a book, you have a website, you have a master class, you have your family. Like, you do it all. If there was a person I was like, you know what, it's possible, you are like right there in my mind. Think you can do it all. And like, just hearing you say, you know, you have people, and people were saying, you know, you have too many other things outside of medicine or outside of surgery to actually be committed to this field. It really, it really breaks my heart, because I think that one of the really big reasons we have such an issue with physician burnout and just the mental health crisis overall is
Mm-hmm.
because it almost becomes like you have to abandon all passion or interest outside of your field in order for you to be taken seriously in your field. And you've really shown that no, that's not only not the case, but you really do help the next generation of leaders when you don't do that.
Oh my.
So like, yeah.
You know, if I had a dime for every time people told me that, I'd probably be a millionaire by now. It's ridiculous, right? The whole idea that if you're, you know, the whole, you know where the whole residency terminology came from?
Oh, tell me.
They, trainees were lived in the hospital. They were residents of the hospital. They never left.
Well, it's not different now.
No, but
Same
that's
thing.
the thing. They never left. They stayed in the hospital, and they stayed there for months on end, got home, you know, once in a while, and then they went right back to work, right? Residency is, you know, the whole work hour restrictions comes from the fact that residents rarely ever left the hospital, and they were worked to death. And you know, you get worked so many hours that you don't have time for anything else, and
Yeah.
then you get so fatigued that you make mistakes. And what's been happening with the whole, you know, work hour restrictions and restructuring what residency is because we have decided that as residents and as trainees that you don't have a life outside of the hospital, and when you're there, you're, you know, taking care of patients 24/7, and that, you know, you're not a human being, right? So what's happening now is we have a lot of burnout. Physician suicide is high. There's like at least one or two physicians killing themselves a day, right? And we have physicians leaving the workforce and going into non-clinical, you know, fields. So,
Yeah.
you know, the physician shortage that we had is getting worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, and forget about the diversity and inclusion stuff that we were talking about. We're not even doing anything about that, right? Because
Yeah.
all we're doing is just we're recruiting more people into the same toxic environment that's awful for a lot of people. And so, you know, the diverse people that we recruit also leave as well. So it's a multifaceted problem. So the way I've approached it is, you know, one of the things that, in addition to my hijab, one of the other personal values that I really wanted to hold on to was the fact that I, you know, love kids and wanted to have a family. And so I actually wanted to wait until I was a, you know, chief resident, have my kids just like everybody else, and leave, you know, have my kids after I was done. That didn't happen. So
plans, right?
plans, right? So what I saw by accident is that when I had kids, I became better at managing my time. I became better at, you know, prioritizing what needs to be done and when. And I did better on my AppSide scores, you know, our in training exams scores. Like the more kids that I had, the higher my score. It was really odd. It was really awkward.
Oh, really? You know,
they were like doing it, and nobody
you know,
else is like, what is like?
Yeah. They like to say it goes the other way.
So really, like, it really opened my eyes to the fact that when I had, you know, when other parts of my life were going well, I would come home, and instead of obsessing about what happened at work, I had my little baby to play with, right? All the bad things, all the worry, you know, would just like melt away. I would talk to my husband for about, you know, 5 minutes about, oh my God, this happened at work. And then I would, you know, be with my baby, right?
Yeah.
And then all my worries would wash away. And then I'd come back to work, you know, ready for a new challenge.
Ready. Yeah.
And it really hit me. And I was like, you know what? You know, we have it backwards in medicine. When we say put your life on hold and, you know, just focus on this, you never have time to, you know, unwind and recuperate and recover and then come back as a, you know, working from a full cup. You know, we're always running on empty. So, so the more I did that, the better I became. Like, I became a better resident. I read more, you know, I did question, you know, banks in between cases. I would, you know, stop by a coffee shop for 30 minutes max and, you know, read and then go home and play with my kids guilt-free, because I knew I did my work, right? I took care of my patients, and I took care of my patients. I did my studies, and now I was like home free. So I saw that and I was like, there is something we're missing in medicine when it comes to work-life balance. We're missing the mark. And so when I finished and I started, you know, my work, I decided to, you know, change my schedule to where I do what's called block scheduling, where when I work, I'm working 100%, right? My calls are back to back to back. But when I'm home, I'm with my kids.
Yeah, you're with your kids. You're with your family.
I'm 100% mommy. And when they're in school doing their other stuff, I can do my other things where I do something like this, or I write, or, you know, I work on my masterclass. And so, you know, having that, all these dimensions to your life, I think makes you more productive. Makes you like, when I go back to work, I'm like, ooh, I want to do a thoracotomy. I want to do an X-lap. Right? I want to fix some ribs.
Where was that for me? As a student, I'm like, a X-lap again? Another one?
Yeah, I mean, like when I go back to work, you know, and I'll do that for like 2 weeks, and at the end of the 2 weeks, I'm like, okay, if I do one more X-lap, I'm so tired. I was like, I just want to play with my kids, and then I get off, and then I'm home with my kids. And, you know, at the end of the 2 weeks when they're driving me nuts, I'm like, I got to go operate.
I'm ready to be gone again. I'm ready to be done. I'm done. So I need to go back in OR.
I think that balance is what really makes me, productive, right? I have these two facets of my life where, you know, each one motivates me differently, and each one replenishes me and rejuvenates me differently, to where I'm always excited about whatever it is I'm doing, right? I'm always excited to try, you know, new things with them. I'm always excited to try, you know, learning new procedures at work. And like, you know, in the next couple of months, I'm going to start doing robotics, right? Like,
very cool.
That's what we need. And in order for us to thrive in our work environments, we have to live a value-based life where you don't feel like you're neglecting, you know, the whole work-life balance thing where you're doing, you know, everything 100% all the time. I think that's a fallacy, right? There are times when, you know, when I'm at work and I'm, you know, I'm more focused on my work than my kids. But you know what? My kids are not abandoned. They have, you know, I'm home when I'm home. If I'm not, my husband's home. Right. So, and the time that I'm not working, you know, it's not that I'm less of a surgeon because I'm not working these 2 weeks. Right. I took care of my patients. I have colleagues who I trust who are taking care of my patients. Right. So I think we need to have that balance of, you know, integrating our work and our life, right? It's work-life integration, not necessarily balance, and, you know, being there and 100% for each part of that.
Yeah. I say it for the people in the back. No, I absolutely agree. And, you know, it's such a strange paradox because doctors treat humans, yet the field of medicine doesn't allow doctors to be human. How strange is that? And how did we get here? And sometimes I hear, you know, physicians that have been practicing for a little while, and they're like, oh, you know, they have all this technology now, and you know, we're losing the human interface. And I'm like, I think it's not been there for a while. It's just that humans have been the machines. We've treated each other like robots and machines, and we've pushed each other beyond the limits of human capability in a lot of ways. And it's time to really step back and, like you said, establish value-based goals so that you can go into practice in a recharged way. I love that. Like, I love that as a person who has a million different hobbies. There's hope for me yet.
There's absolutely, you know, definitely there's hope. And I think, most of medicine doesn't embrace that, and that's a really sad reality. But I think as individuals, that's why I focus more on the individual level and reaching out to medical students and those in training, pre-meds, to really say, what, you can go into this and you can be the force for change, right? You can be your own agent of change. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit as to how much power we have in affecting change that we want to see.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Especially at the medical student level, I think, I remember hearing my peers. Maybe I'm not necessarily the best example because I'm not a traditional student, but I know that there were times as a student, it's hard to speak up. It's hard to self-advocate. And it's those moments when you see something wrong or you feel uncomfortable and you don't speak up, those moments, they kind of haunt you after a while. So it makes sense when you say it took you 3 years to kind of pull back the layers. It's almost like a PTSD. You have to like pull the layers of trauma back from this experience.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've seen that happens very frequently on social media is we're all going through these multiple levels of discrimination, right? It's there's implicit bias that we've all seen, there's explicit bias that some of us have seen, and nobody ever teaches you how to deal with it. Not many people are in a place to speak up. Not many people are in a place to say exactly what they want to see, what they want to say, without consequences, right? Without repercussion. Recently, like if you go on social media, you'll see faculty, attendings who are being suspended for speaking truth, right? For just talking about their own personal experiences, right? And they're experiencing retaliation. So what is the expectation of a medical student, or a resident, to have fair hearing, or someone to actually side with them and listen to them. So I think not reporting things and speaking up and saying what exactly it is that you want to say, I don't think those are the only options available. There are ways to be strategic around it. And I think that's one of the things that I uncovered for myself after going through my dealing with my PTSD. And those are the things that I really want to empower students with, because I feel like if you can do that, if you can get through this toxic system, because I feel like in order to change a system, you have to be experienced with it. So we need more people experienced with the ins and outs of the system, get through it to the end, and then be in positions of power where they can say something and they can do something about the system. Right? Our pipeline problem is not going to fix itself, and those in positions of power right now don't even want to hear about it. Right. At the first sign, of the fact that there is a problem within their academic institutions, what do? They retaliate against the very people that are victims, that are that are at the receiving end of the problems that we have, right? So I feel like it's going to take those people that are directly impacted to change the system, but they have to be in positions of power to do so.
Yeah, I agree. And I wonder sometimes, what's the fear, within these institutions? Like, what does it do for you? If you hear a problem and you fix it, you would think that it would speak, higher of you as an institution, as a leader, to be able to take that feedback and grow. But you're absolutely right. We're seeing that all around the country, especially because of COVID now. We're weirdly like seeing COVID is really like rolling back the layers and showing the true realities about how our healthcare professionals are not supported in a lot of different ways. And I think people are watching now. We're watching, how do you as an institution support, our heroes, the people that allow our family members and our friends to live and have dreams and health and, vitality. How do you support those people? And I would sometimes wonder, what are they afraid of? Like, what's so bad about saying we have room to grow?
Because I think one of the problems that I've seen with when the issue of racism and sexism, I think those are the two most common things that come up, is the emotional component of it, right? Every time you hear people talk about that, they automatically feel like they're being directly called out, right? That they are being called racist if they're not dealing with racism in the right way. So I think it's the emotional response that's overriding everything else, right? They feel like they feel compelled to protect themselves from being called racist, and so they, their automatic response is retaliation or saying no, that it's not, this is not true. We can't be racist because we tweet about diversity and inclusion, right?
Yeah.
How dare you call us racist when we tweet out that there's only 3% of Black men in medicine, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we have to uncouple the emotional aspect of the fact that racism is killing people, right? The social determinants of health, racism is part of it, right? Within our healthcare system, within our how our society, politics, everything, how is it has impacted communities. We see the impact that racism has on the health of our populations, right? So why can you not be objective? If we can be objective about medical error, right? We've had a culture change in medicine, right?
Absolutely.
We've had a culture change in medicine in how we deal with medical errors, right? Because that's an emotional thing too, because I don't make errors, I don't harm patients. So we've had that change, right? We've approached it from a systematic way. I'm hoping that we can do that with racism, but it's going to take a lot of brave leaders to really check themselves and say, what, I understand this is an emotionally charged situation, but we can do better. The same way we've tackled medical errors. You remove the individual responsibility out of it. That's how we deal with errors, right? We don't point the finger at what individual and say you did this. We say how did the system fail? If there are individuals that need to be retrained, we do that. If it's a system thing where multiple people missed it, then we fix that, right? We make it safer for us to provide medical care. We can make our institutions less racist by identifying where racism happens, right?
Absolutely.
But
absolutely,
it's been 400 years of this country dealing with that. So it's going to take a lot more than a few diversity inclusion workshops and speaking engagements for us to really deal with this. But I think I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful, but it's going to be a long way.
No, and I agree. One of our viewers, Dr. Salam, said, I think one issue is that people don't think something exists until they experience it themselves, and that's absolutely true. And I think people, especially with police brutality, and it was interesting, it all happened at a time when we were all held captive at home. We had no choice but to watch the news and watch the media. And I was blown away by the number of people who were so surprised. And I felt kind of sad that I, as a minority, wasn't surprised. But it was like it wasn't real until it was real. And I think COVID is highlighting, especially as we're seeing that communities of color in particular are negatively impacted by COVID. COVID is really highlighting that diversity in medicine is a healthcare issue. It's not about just one person. Like you're saying, it's a system that ultimately feeds and hurts a larger objective, which is to protect our patients and improve health and wellness.
It does. And we actually have recent studies that show that, improved diversity improves mortality. There's a recent study that came out, I think, out of Minnesota, where they looked at Black infant mortality. When they matched, the race of the infant in the doctor, right? Black infants survived more when they were cared for by Black physicians, right? I mean, there is something there, right? There are issues that are, important within the Somali community that, I and other Somali physicians talk about and bring to light. One of my, colleagues who's in Seattle created Somali Health Board, highlighting the issues within the Somali community that nobody else, identified. Why? Because she connects with that community, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
you can message more with that community. So the lack of diversity in medicine like harms our patients.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We can save more lives with diversity in medicine, but a lot of people don't see it that way, right? People get offended by saying, well, I, as a non, Black, Indigenous, or person of color physician, I can take care of any patient, the same way as, as anybody else. There are patients that may not be comfortable talking to you, but they're comfortable talking to someone from their own background, right? I've seen that firsthand with a family, who were they're from the Middle East, and there was a miscommunication between our team members and the family. Issue with the age, and a lot of things got missed in translation, and whether the family wanted surgery or not. I came on, and the next day it was like, oh, alhamdulillah, sister, thank God, sister, I'm glad you're on. I can talk to you. And all of a sudden, all the miscommunication, that
goes
happened,
away.
Yeah, we cleared it up, and they're like, we want surgery. We just had a whole bunch of questions because he's the patriarch of our family, and he had all these questions that we weren't refusing surgery. And you have to have people who can connect. Not every single person can connect with everybody, right?
Absolutely.
There are,
Absolutely.
and cultural background, race plays a lot into that. Language barriers, right?
Yeah.
If I can come and talk to someone in Somali, of course they're going to tell me a lot more than they're going to tell you in their broken English. That's just how we, So unless we accept that we as physicians aren't, all powerful and can do anything and everything, when we realize our limitations, that we can't connect with every patient, and we have to have diversity in medicine to serve our diverse population, then we can move forward with actually really dealing with our health inequities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the art of medicine. That's the whole thing. It's the art of medicine. Not every artist uses clay. Not every artist uses oil. So sometimes culture can be viewed that way. It's just not your medium. So you need someone else who's experienced in that medium to make it happen. But we all have the same objective, which is to protect the health and wellness of our patients.
Yep.
So you just like, Shiro all day long. Shiro. For the students that are listening, go tell me.
No. I think somebody was posting something about whether we're taking questions or not.
I saw that come by the screen, and then I looked in the Q&A, and I did not see a question. So I will say, if you have a question, we have time. Actually, we have 10 minutes. If you have a question, please post it. My medical school is not diverse at all, and when I look back, I feel sad because med school is the place to start this. I agree. I definitely agree. And that was one of the reasons why I chose my med school, was because I thought, med school is going to be hard. I don't want it to be hard and also be because I'm a minority. I don't know that I can deal with both of those things. I was coming from a PWI, and there was a lot of politics around race at that time. And I was like, I don't want to have to be the Martin Luther King of medical school. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. There was not enough hours in a day to be a civil rights activist and do my MCAT. And my step one. Like, I just don't have time. And so I absolutely agree that there definitely needs to be more diversity in medicine, and I think that's why conversations like this, and I'm gonna do a shameless plug for Gabba right now, platforms like Gabba, are so important, because they really do rally around, bringing in more diversity and supporting candidates of diverse background. It's a multifaceted problem, like you said. Let me keep looking here. I didn't see that person's question. Did you see that person's question?
Oh, no, it wasn't a question. I think it was just, are you taking questions? Yes. Yes, we are taking questions.
Yes, we are taking questions. Yes, we are taking questions.
Yeah, but I think, that's one of the things I am going to plug for you as well. If I had something like Go Gabba when I was a medical student, I think it's not only, the fact that it's, resources that are provided for you, or you're told, which resources are really good to use. I think just the support of, what you're going through is normal. A lot of us have gone through it. I think that's a very important question, or important conversation to have. Is, we suffer in silence. A lot of people in medicine suffer in silence. And I think just acknowledging the fact that, hey, this is problematic. We see that you have to deal with it, but some things you can confront head on. Other things you just have to go around it to get to your end goal, right? I think we don't teach that. We feel like, every problem that you come across, you just have to swallow, take all the abuse and just keep plugging along, that you have no other option. I think we need to explore other options and really figure out how you don't only have to survive medical school residency. How can you thrive despite all the negativity? That's what we need to focus on. How do you thrive despite all the negativity? Come out a whole, not in pieces, right? We all come out in pieces. I came out in pieces.
I'm on my way out.
It took me like 3 years to put all the parts back together. I'm like, I still feel like I'm missing something.
I'm the same way. What did I do here? Okay, here we go. Question. How do you suggest engaging people in discussion when they really just don't see it about, like, they don't see race, or they don't see the lack of diversity?
Well, it depends on who the person is. Whether they see it or not really matters, right? If it's a co-student, if it's a medical student that, just doesn't see it, and, I've had a lot of ones that will just argue with you for the sake of argument, right? Is it really worth your time educating this person? Right? If it's a colleague and you think, their actions will actually impact their patients, then I would definitely say, okay, this is worth it, right? So I think you have to learn to read people a little bit to see what their end goal is. If people are there are people that just like to get under your skin, especially when it comes to topics like this. And I've been angered by a lot of these people and let them get under my skin. Don't do that. Okay. But if they are serious and if they really do want to learn, then I would question. One of my favorite ways to really engage people is, whatever statements they make, ask them to elaborate. Why do you think that is? Right? Why do you think, it's, I've had someone say something like, what was it? We had a patient coming in with a gunshot wound or something like that. And they were like, oh, I bet it's a black gangbanger or something like that. All right. And I would just ask them, why would you assume that? Okay, even if it's a black man who's shot, why do you assume that he's a gangbanger? Every black man that you see, is he automatically a gangbanger to you? When you ask questions like that, it forces people to really question, their implicit bias, right? When it's directed towards you, I've had people, I was at a new hospital, and I had, one of the new docs come to me and was like, hey, did you call where's the trauma surgeon? Did you call the trauma surgeon? And I just looked at him like, I don't know, dude. I was like, who do you think the trauma surgeon is? And he's like, where is he? Where? I was like, oh, are they all men now? When you question people, when you instead of you having to explain, right? Have people explain their bias to you. Right? I think when people are forced to look at themselves and question their own bias and explain their own bias, it forces them to really look inside and think, because a lot of times people aren't that reflective. Right? So that's one of the ways I've always engaged, is when I've been on the receiving end of you know, some sexist remark or racism remark or something about, you know, my hijab or whatever, I always, you know, start off with questioning them before I start lecturing them, right?
Yes.
Then
Yes.
you see where they're at, right?
Yeah.
If they, you know, if they're so unaware that they just have, you know, some random, you know, like tiny little pieces of information or awareness of the issue, that they just say whatever comes to mind, then, you know, you have to start way at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
But if they have, you know, if they have, you know, quite a bit of knowledge, but they just have a misunderstanding, then you can correct that misunderstanding. And I've been able to, you know, reach a lot of people that way and have, you know, really start having conversation. And I've had people who were otherwise, you know, uncomfortable asking me questions about my faith. As soon as as they see me sharing, they're like, "Do you mind if I ask you this?" Or "Why do Muslims do this?" Or "Why do you wear this?" When people see that you're open to, you know, not just attacking and calling them, you know, whatever bias they have, that and that you're willing to listen and explain, then I think that you can really start having that conversation.
Yeah, that is amazing advice. I think that's what do they say? Instead of calling them out, you call them in. You kind of invite them to have a conversation. And I love I love asking them questions, because one thing I get tired. I don't know, you know, I think part of the thing is you don't know how to even start it. But if you start with where they are, if you just say, "Hey, why did you assume I was the nurse when I walked in here? What made you say that?" Then it allows them to go, "Oh, I don't know." And then it's not a conversation you're making them have. It's a conversation they're having with themselves, and you're just facilitating. I'm just facilitating your exploration of this moment. This has been absolutely, look, I'm trying to cheat over here. Oh, goodness, listen. This has been a phenomenal conversation, as I knew it would, because you're amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your time with all of our wonderful viewers and being our first Motivation Monday. If people want to connect with you after this, where should they go?
They can connect with me on Instagram. I'm not as active as I'd like to be, but I'm trying. I'm also on Twitter. I think I'm a little bit more active on Twitter. My webpage is on my Twitter handle. You can contact me there for any, I talk to schools, colleges, medical schools, you know, any organization group that needs motivation to change the game, because that's really what we want to do. And the links to sign up for my masterclass are also on there. And any other future projects I have coming up, you can find on there as well. And I'm always open to people reaching out for advice, so we can all continue to change the game.
She's not lying, y'all. I found her on Twitter and she responded. Which is a thing. People don't respond to you. She actually responded. So reach out. I'm telling you, I'm proof of concept.
No, seriously, like my main focus, you know, a lot of my colleagues will do, you know, speaking engagements, and they'll talk to the schools and, you know, hospitals and whatnot. I personally feel like the people who are going to change this field are the people who are most impacted by its imperfections, right? The shortcomings of medicine, the implicit bias, the sexism, the racism, all the things that we have are going to be changed by the people who are impacted by it and who are no longer going to be accepting of this nonsense, right? So that is what I'm here to help to do. So let's get it done.
Yes, let's do it. Y'all, thank you so much. This is our Motivation Monday. If you want more of these, we will be doing them every Monday, even if it's just me trying to motivate you. I'll do my best. But if you want to talk to us on one of our Motivation Mondays, I want to hear your story. I want to connect. Your story honestly inspires the next generation of leaders. So even if you think like, oh, I just make canned goods in my basement, you will be surprised. So please reach out to us at Go Gabba Co. Stay connected. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, website, blah, 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 blah. We're there. And see y'all next week.
Bye, guys.